Washington, D.C.
We are talking right now. We're talking at the request of Iran, backed by Saudi Arabia, backed by UAE, and backed by Qatar in particular, but others also. Many countries called. The leaders of many are friendly with a lot of them, almost all of them, one way or the other, and they all wanted to give this a last chance. This is a last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is a last chance for them to sign a good document.
Tonight, last chance. President Trump warns current negotiations with Tehran are Iran's last chance to reach an agreement after calling off another round of strikes this weekend. Former U.S. Ambassador to Iraq and Turkey James Jeffrey joins us on what comes next. And let's make a deal. Republican holdouts strike a bargain with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to rescind the order creating an anti-weaponization fund, potentially clearing his path for confirmation. But President Trump is downplaying the deal. And finally, staving off a shutdown. Senate appropriators strike a bipartisan deal to keep the government funded beyond the midterms. A vote to advance the legislation is set for later this hour, and we'll bring you the results. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kayleigh Lyons alongside Joe Matthew.
President Trump, Kayleigh, says the latest round of talks with Tehran will go quickly after calling off what he described as a major attack on Iran last weekend. But Trump warned in the Oval Office today that this round indeed could be the last chance.
Well, you don't know. I don't know. I think we're going to maybe get something, but I want to give them every last chance before decapitation. It's very tough to do what we have planned, still planned. We'll see what happens. But it's a very, very tough thing to do. I think I'm very proud of the fact that I'll give people a chance. This is a big move. To do an attack that big on a country, I'd rather not do it.
But Iran has denied talks are happening directly, at least with the U.S. It says it's currently in negotiations with Oman to get ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Joining us now live from the White House is Bloomberg's Courtney Subramanian, who was in the Oval Office today with the president. Courtney, it's great to have you with us. Can you clear this up? Do we know who is talking to whom?
No, that seems to be the central question. The president insisted that the U.S. is having conversations, negotiations with Iran. Iran is denying that that they're talking to the U.S., saying they're only talking to Oman, as you said, about trying to get some ships through the Strait of Hormuz. I did ask the president whether Iran was willing to return to free passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Take a listen to what he said.
Would Iran be willing to return to fully free navigation?
It has to be. I'm not going to let them charge. If anybody's going to charge, we'll charge. We're the one that has total control. We have total control. You know, we have a thing called a blockade with his Navy. And that Navy is, they call it a wall of steel, the United States wall of steel. And no, there's not going to be charging. We're not talking about charging at all.
Now, as you heard there, the president said that he would not accept any sort of tolls from Iran. But of course, Iran has showed no sign at this point of allowing free passage of ships through the strait, and has said that a fee structure would be a key condition of any deal that was reached. We did press the president on a timeline of how long these talks would go on. He did say that they would go very quickly. He wanted to give them one last chance. But he also said in the same answer that he was under no time constraint. So we are in a bit of a wait-and-see posture here at the White House.
Well, and of course, you were dealing with a lot of other questions at the White House today. The president was also posed the question as to whether or not he signed off on Todd Blanche's statement sent to Senators Tom Tillis and John Cornyn that effectively formally rescinded the Anti-Weaponization Fund, clarified some details around the IRS immunity for President Trump. The president suggested he hadn't looked at that. Courtney, is there a chance that this does not, in fact, have his buy-in?
He did seem to downplay this decision after tweeting about it over the weekend, going as far as to saying that he would be willing to pull Todd Blanche's nomination until Cornyn and Tillis are no longer in office. But the president said he did not sign off on this. He did not look at it. He said it was his understanding that Todd Blanche had agreed to reconfirm to things he had already said. But it did give us, some clarity around the scope of the president's immunity deal. Todd Blanche did sign this document that rescinded the fund, but also limited the scope of his immunity deal just to the IRS and not other agencies like the DOJ. But critics say this agreement does not change the text in the underlying settlement, and that the president could possibly return to this fund later on down the line. So I think there's a reason we're seeing the president downplay this at this point.
All right, we'll be digging more into that with a legal expert later this hour. Bloomberg's Courtney Subramanian live from the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. But we now want to dig in more to the prospects of a potential deal with Iran. As President Trump has said repeatedly, as we've told you, this is the last chance. And joining us now is Ambassador James Jeffrey, Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, former U.S. Ambassador to Iraq and Turkey, and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush. Ambassador, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We have seen a repeated pattern here of the president issuing an ultimatum to Iran, threatening to escalate, only then to walk that back. So what reason does Iran have to believe that this chance really is the last one?
First, thanks for having me on. I was one of President Trump's Middle East guys from 2018 to 2020. And one thing with him is he's usually not particularly precise in describing the situation to the media. He's trying to influence as much as inform. That said, there's no doubt that we were ready for a major strike. Unlike the threats that we've seen repeatedly, as you mentioned, since June, the Israelis were on board. The plug was pulled at the last moment. They were surprised in Jerusalem. And the reason is, the Saudis and others went to Trump and said, hold off. They don't want to have retaliatory strikes. But more importantly, I think there was a real negotiation ongoing, not between us and the Iranians, but indirectly through the Omanis and the Iranians about a way to clarify and open the straits. Who will control the shipping and all of that? President Trump says no fees. Well, we'll see, because you can always charge transit services charges and things like that. It happens in the Dardanelles, for example. So there may be something afoot. Certainly there was something that led him to call off the attack, which, frankly, I don't think he really wants to do. He may have to, but at the moment, I think he's happy seeing if he can work something out through negotiations.
So what was, Ambassador, the bullet that was dodged? What could have happened last weekend? Is there, in fact, a strike that would decapitate, as he says, Tehran?
No, we tried that back in February, remember? And we decapitated a lot of people, particularly the Israelis did, literally, and it didn't do anything. It never does, or almost never does. Taking out leaders, they're replaced by other leaders. But what he was planning on doing was massive strikes on the energy, fuel, transportation, and communications that gives the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, control over not only military force to keep the straits closed, but also to control the Iranian population. Very important, given that they rose up back in January. So that is a different quality of threat that he had put on the table. It may have had an influence on the Iranians. It may not. We'll have to wait and see. But talks are going on at one level between who knows.
Well, yeah, we've been long asking the question, who is talking to who, and what about their private statements is actually being conveyed in public statements, which often seem very different, Ambassador. There seems to be a real lack of trust on all sides here, frankly. How do you ever get to a negotiated outcome so long as that is true?
My experience has been that states that trust each other never get into serious negotiations because they're able to fix things informally by calls and by good relationships. most negotiations are between states that don't trust each other. And boy, that sure sums up where we are with the Iranians. They had a good deal back in June, the memorandum of understanding Trump signed. It probably tilted too far towards the Iranians. That was Lindsey Graham's position. But nonetheless, they tore it up and shut the straits down. And that was done by the radical element of the Iranian governing party, which is the Revolutionary Guards. And they're going to have to sign off on any agreement or any understanding, because otherwise they'll keep shooting at ships in the straits.
How many times can the president do this, threaten to obliterate the country, pulling it back at the last minute when neighbors ask us to do so, before no one believes him anymore? Ambassador, it looks like the market will give him the benefit of the doubt indefinitely here. How about Middle East states? I think we are at the end of the tether in terms of making major threats. If it turns out, A, that there was real negotiations and therefore he had a real reason to call off the strikes rather than it was all a bluff, and then the Iranians pull out of these talks again, then I think possibly. But if this all looks like he was just bluffing, if there really wasn't some kind of more than the usual chatter back and forth, because there's always chatter back and forth between the Iranians and some of our intermediaries. If there was a real thing there that caused him to stop, and the Iranians then pull the plug on that, he may go forward. On the other hand, he's not in all that weak a position. The entire Iranian export industry has been cut off due to the blockade, as you pointed out. We're taking big hits, too, on oil prices and such. But Trump may think we can tolerate that better than they. We'll see. But for the moment, I would say negotiation is the priority.
Well, the president, as you consider the economic pressure being placed on Iran via the blockade, certainly, but also potentially through tighter sanctions, the president, Ambassador, pushed for Iran to be included in the sanction passage authored by Senator Lindsey Graham before his passing that was supposed to target Russia. Now Iran inclusive. The Senate very well could vote on this before the recess at the end of this week. What signal will that send to Iran? What pressure realistically will it apply?
It's at this point, given the package of sanctions we already have on them, it will only be, if you will, a baby step forward, but that's okay. It has signaling potential. It will show the Iranians that we're just going to up the pressure, if not by leaps and bounds and step by step, and that Trump is not going to quit because he doesn't like what's happening on the oil markets. That's an important consideration because the Iranians think they can outlast it. Looking at the economics of it, they can't. Looking at the politics of it, they may think they can.
Ambassador, just quickly, as we're out of time, I've been asking everybody this. This is a political show that you're on. Will this still be underway on November 3rd?
I don't know. What I do know is we are in deep trouble if we do not, in the end, tame and contain Iran. I believe Trump knows that. That will shape questions like how long and what impact on November and his political future, frankly.
Well, we'd love to stay in touch with you on that, Ambassador James Jeffrey. Thank you so much, as always, for being with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, after the U.S. stepped in last week to help prop up Japan's currency, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the administration will not hesitate to step into the market again. And we'll have more on what's motivating the intervention next on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
They're making too much money, okay? Based on a shortage, they're making too much money. I don't like it. And I should be the last one to say, because I'm a big free enterprise guy. Chevron, too much money. ExxonMobil, too much money. When you look at one company where they made 12 times what they made the year before, they're going to give some of that back to the public. And they better cut the retail price, the consumer price.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lines. And that was President Trump earlier today in the Oval Office criticizing ExxonMobil and Chevron for soaring profits as oil prices surged due to the war in Iran. But as we see in today's power moves, today was a little different. You actually had Chevron and Exxon lower, bucking the broader trend in the market, which was a big rally across stocks. The S&P 500 actually closed within a hair of an all-time high, rallying about 1.5%. There was real outperformance in technology in particular, in part due to the fact that Amazon was up more than 4% and now has a more than $3 trillion market value, topping that as only 1 in 5 companies to ever do so in history. But Chevron was down about 1.8%, not just because of the harsh words from President Trump, but also because we saw oil prices falling today. That has everything to do with President Trump's calling off of further strikes against Iran over the weekend. That is why both WTI and Brent were down in the ballpark of 5%. Brent closing at an 83 handle and WTI just above $80 a barrel. Now, no surprise, oil prices moving lower eases some inflation concerns out there in the bond market. Hence, we saw a rally in treasuries with yields moving lower across the curve by just about 4 basis points. The 10-year at 4.67, the 30-year rather at 5.22. One more asset class to check on, though, Joe, and that is currencies. We have to talk about what's happening in dollar yen, strengthening again today, actually now at the strongest level against the dollar going back to May, now at about a 157.20 level. And that is, of course, due to direct intervention, not just from Japan, but also from the United States. The U.S. and Japan acting jointly in that currency intervention for the first time in 15 years, Joe.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kaylee. And how about Kaylee Lines on power moves? Both the U.S. and Japan now signaling they're open to stepping back into the market to continue to defend the yen after that joint intervention, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent writing on X, Treasury remains attentive and in close communication with our counterparts at MOF and BOJ. We will not hesitate to participate in further joint intervention, unquote. President Trump telling reporters on Air Force One yesterday the U.S. will continue to be there for Japan.
We have a good relationship with Japan. We're very strong, very, very strong financially. They wanted a little bit of help, and we're always there for Japan. Japan's been very good to us.
Joining us now for more live from New York, Bloomberg's Michael McKee. Mike, clearly the administration has decided this is in our best interest as a nation. How far is the administration willing to go?
Well, that'll be the question that Scott Bessent has to answer, usually not very far in these things, because interventions by themselves don't work. And the issue for Japan is basically interest rate differentials between the U.S. and the Japanese. They're at 1%. We're at 3.5% to 3.75%. So the United States is seen as a much better place to put their money. And not only is that the case for companies there, it's also true for people who are in the government's pension plans and for their basic analog to the 401k plan. So the feeling is yes, they can arrest the slide in the Japanese yen, but unless Japan takes some fundamental actions, they're still going to have this problem going forward. And at some point, it doesn't become worth it to the United States.
Well, why is it worth it to the United States now, Mike? What's in it for us?
Well, it's always a sort of dividing line, because at some point when the Japanese currency or any currency falls too far, then it makes it a problem for the U.S. because it brings in deflated prices, basically, for goods. So inflation becomes an issue, and we buy a lot of Japanese goods. It also can hurt U.S. automakers as well. So you don't want to let them go too far. We're certainly farther than we were back in 1998, the last time we intervened directly with them. We were at about 147, I think, at that point. So they've expanded the band, but this is roughly the area where I guess the Treasury Department decides it's not worth letting it go any farther for the United States, because it can be harmful to the economy.
What do you make of the market's reaction to this so far then, Mike, as officials figure out their next steps?
Well, it's basically what you would expect and what we have seen in the past. The markets take a break because some people got hurt. I mean, they're definitely not going to be priced for the kind of intervention that they got. Now, the question is, when do people start tipping their toe back into the idea that they need to sell yen and send it overseas. That could happen sometime in the next week or so, or it could happen in a couple of days. That's why you're hearing from Secretary Bessent it's partly jawboning to try to keep people on the sidelines as long as possible. But the bet is that we're still going to see the yen continue to weaken. How fast is going to be the issue.
All right, Bloomberg's Mike McKee, thank you so much. And some news breaking this hour. OpenAI Sam Altman has just been asked to brief a House panel on AI security issues. This follows last month the company disclosing that autonomous AI agents escaped a testing environment and gained unauthorized access to systems on the Hugging Face platform, an incident its CEO says could have been far worse. Earlier today, Bloomberg tech host Ed Ludlow spoke with Hugging Face's CEO Clem DeLong about defending against such attacks.
It could have been way worse, right? Like, for example, we're an AI platform, right? So we have kind of like good ways to defend ourselves. But a lot of other organizations, companies don't have kind of like the same defenses. Obviously, some domains are, more at risks than others. So I think it could have been much worse. But we need to take this kind of like seriously as a wake-up call for us to kind of like work more on getting these systems secure and giving more tools to all defenders and generally creating more transparency and more monitoring of these systems.
Has the US government taken this as a wake-up call? Which branches of government have reached out to you since the event was disclosed?
I'm not going to talk to kind of like more the private conversations that we've had, but we obviously reported that to kind of like the relevant authorities and have had kind of like a bunch of conversations with different organizations, different kind of like Congress members and people from government. I mean, there are a couple of things that I think we need to do and get right in the next few months. First, in my opinion, we have to make sure that cyber attacks, even when they're done by agents, stay a crime and illegal, and make sure to enforce that. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a world where everyone is cyber attacking everyone with really no disincentive to it. Second, we need to create more transparency. Like, for example, why not doing mandatory disclosure when agent cyber attack is happening? And third, we have to kind of like give more tools to defenders, right? Like we mentioned open models. These are kind of like some of the tools that cyber attack defenders need to make sure that they can defend themselves.
That's Clem DeLong, the CEO of Hugging Face, which is suddenly a household name, Kaylee, and it's going to stay that way as we look ahead to this White House meeting tomorrow. Really fascinating timing as we consider the safety of these models, just like the ones that broke out of the sandbox and hacked Hugging Face. The Trump administration, now with this AI framework, will be hosting some of the bold faces from AI tomorrow to get to this safety framework and see if they can sort of cross the T's and dot the I's.
Yeah, executives from the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic and Google are expected to be there. Granted, we haven't actually seen the framework publicly yet, but it's what has been created out of the executive order that President Trump signed earlier this summer, essentially creating a voluntary regime for these new models to be tested by the government first before they're released. But of course, the operative word is voluntary, and especially in the face of the Hugging Face hack and similar disclosures made by Anthropic about models escaping their own sandboxes over there. There's a question as to whether or not that really is enough in terms of securing and regulating.
Yeah, there'll be no mandates here. Then again, it's the companies themselves that wrote the language that brought us to this framework. So there's a thought that they might want to cooperate here. But let's remember as well, they don't all agree amongst themselves. No. It was Sam Altman last week who talked about pacing the future, even as Jensen Huang tries to push the gas a little bit on the AI race. So these are some things that will need to be hashed out tomorrow. And apparently it'll be happening at the White House. We'll have more coverage on that, of course, tomorrow. And coming up this evening, how dead is dead? We'll get a lawyer's eye on the details of Todd Blanche's rescission of the Anti-Weaponization Fund. Constitutional attorney Robert McWhirter joins us next. We'll get the view of a lawyer on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. Senators Tom Tillis and John Cornyn have struck a deal with Todd Blanche to advance his confirmation to be the next attorney general after Blanche formally rescinded the order creating the so-called Anti-Weaponization Fund and clarified the scope of the president's sweeping IRS immunity deal. The senators, writing in a statement, quote, "We are pleased that the Department of Justice has issued a formal order terminating the Anti-Weaponization Fund and acknowledged in a binding written order that the audit settlement is limited to the plaintiffs. We want to express our gratitude to Mr. Blanche, and we look forward to voting to advance his nomination out of the Senate Judiciary Committee soon." That committee vote is scheduled for Tuesday morning. And joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Erik Wasson covering Capitol Hill for us. So, Erik, this is at 9 a.m. tomorrow, the markup in the Judiciary Committee, I believe. Any reason to believe it won't go smoothly?
I think the Judiciary Committee will go smoothly. There's still an open question on the floor. We'll be asking Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, and others if they're comfortable with this agreement. It has enough holes in it to make it basically Swiss cheese, as far as most analysts say. I mean, it basically limits the audit settlement to the plaintiffs, which is Trump and the Trump Organization. That is a limitation compared to the original settlement, but it still basically allows the president to potentially get away with tax violations in past years, amounting millions of dollars. The weaponization fund, there's really nothing binding from stopping the president from trying to create that one day in the future. So I think, the senators got half a loaf and they're willing to take it. And likely the attorney general will be confirmed this week. John Thune's planning to push that through before recess. But, it doesn't do a lot to limit the settlement.
Well, since there are so many holes here, you referred to Swiss cheese, Erik. We're going to talk to Robert McWhirter in a moment, who's going to blow even more holes in this, I think. And I'm looking at the joint statement from Tillis and Cornyn. We want to express our gratitude, it says, to Mr. Blanche and his staff for working with us on this. We look forward to voting to advance his nomination out of committee soon. Why climb down so easily?
Well, I think they're under a lot of pressure. They are ultimately Republicans and party players. John Cornyn says he'll never be running for office again, but who knows? Maybe he wants to seek a nomination for something else in the future. So they want to show that while they're men of principle, they are ultimately party loyalists. So I think they're trying to find that delicate balance. They did get some changes, but many would argue it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, this is only one order of business before the Senate recesses for the long summer break. Erik, they also are going to be voting, at least procedurally, to advance a continuing resolution to fund the government through December. It's not the same CR that the House passed. So even if it can get through the Senate, is it going to avert a shutdown?
The House had a December 4th stopgap, and this is a December 11th. That's probably a minor change. One thing that may give some dyspepsia to the House is there's a effort here to stop the Office of Management and Budget, the Budget Office, from really promulgating a rule that's designed to block government grants from going to blue states. They've been quite open about this. And there's bipartisan pushback to that, especially from appropriators. They just feel that, if we go down that road of every election steering infrastructure projects and other grants, just depending on who voted for the presidents, can create a really big mess. This would limit that or block that for the duration of the stopgap, and there may be an attempt to do it permanently, but there could be some opposition in the House to that. On the other hand, there are elements in here that the White House requested, not for the Trump battleships, but for other Navy, projects, making sure that the money can flow to these contracts. That's stuff that in the rush to go on recess, the House failed to include. I thought it was quite extraordinary in drafting their stopgap. They kind of slapped it together, passed it, but didn't even include White House requests that were coming in. So, we'll see. I think the House will probably take this up the first week they're back, August 31st, try to get it done. But my question will be, was the president going to threaten a veto? He has said he won't sign anything that doesn't have the Save America Act. Is he willing to provoke a shutdown? I'm sure his advisors don't want to see that.
Well, we're not out of the woods yet. Erik, it's great to have you with us live from the briefing room there on the House side. Erik Wasson, thank you so much. Try this on for size before we talk to Robert McWhirter. Bloomberg opinion contributor and University of Michigan Law School professor Barbara McQuaid warning, quote, "Don't be fooled about this Blanche deal." She writes, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's assurance to senators is nothing more than a hollow gesture The new deal Blanche signed does nothing to prevent the DOJ from giving large payouts to the president's allies. Perhaps even worse, she writes, Trump's apparent failure to comply with federal tax laws still forgiven at the expense of the American taxpayer, unquote. Joining us now, Robert McWhirter. As mentioned, he's a constitutional lawyer, founder of the law office of Robert McWhirter. It's great to see you, Robert. Welcome back to Bloomberg. Maybe you can treat us, the American taxpayer, as your client, now that you've had a chance to review these letters. I think Erik compared it to Swiss cheese. How about you?
I don't think there's any cheese at all. I mean, it comes down basically to that. Swiss cheese is a nice way to put it, but this is not an enforceable agreement in any way. How are they going to get Todd Blanche to follow it? It's utterly ambiguous, so there's nothing else that can be done.
Okay, is there a way that this statement could have been worded that would have guaranteed it's enforceable, or is it the very principle here is that they're asking Todd Blanche to commit to something that they're not actually ever going to be able to enforce that commitment?
They're asking him to commit to something they could never enforce. You can't have the Congress, this is separation of powers, you can't have the Congress directing, except through a statute, anything like this. Now, Congress could pass a statute that says this can't happen, and so they could maybe do something like that. But a promise from a sitting official, an attorney general, is utterly unenforceable. There's just nothing to do. I mean, really, I think, to be kind of flip about it, I think a pinky swear has far more force than what Todd Blanche is promising. The only thing I suppose they could do is the House of Representatives could impeach Todd if he doesn't follow this, but the Senate would have to try him, and that's probably never going to happen. This is something that has just totally no force or meaning in the law. Now, I would also say that the original agreement with Donald Trump that Blanche engineered in court about this also has no force. And I don't see how it has anything what we would call consideration.
What does it say about an attorney general, assuming he will be confirmed here, Robert, and that seems to be the going logic here in Washington, an attorney general confirmed after renegotiating an existing settlement? How does that, I think it's terrible, color his tenure before it even begins?
Well, I think that this Department of Justice is already tainted with Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche. Look, the Attorney General of the United States, which actually is the oldest cabinet position in our government, like any cabinet official, takes an oath to the Constitution. They don't take an oath to the president, and they take an oath to support the Constitution and the rule of law. It is clear from Pam Bondi's behavior and now Todd Blanche's behavior that they see their loyalty as only to one person, and that is Donald Trump. And anything else is second to that. So again, if you look at the original deal where Donald Trump sued Donald Trump because he's the head of the Internal Revenue Service and he's a private plaintiff. So it's really Donald Trump sues Donald Trump and gets a settlement, an agreement that the American taxpayers have to pay. It's kind of like if I went in court and sued myself and then got the taxpayers to pay the judgment that I get. Well, that's essentially what's gone on here. And the judgment that he gets is immunity from all of his false income taxes that he ever would have filed in the past. And it's a little unclear whether that doesn't apply to him in the future. It's like he's given himself a future indulgence to violate the tax laws.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, Robert. What's different once he's out of office?
Nothing. I mean, I would say this, though. I don't think that agreement has force either. Under the Constitution, you have to have a case of controversy. This is the beginning of Article 3 of the Constitution. There's no case here. A case usually means, you and I have a dispute, and we go into court and we have a case because you want one thing and I want another thing. Well, here there's no two parties. And to have a contract, this is lawyer talk, you have to have what's called consideration. In other words, I want something and you give me something back. In exchange for that, I give you something. That's a contract between two people. You go buy a car. I give you money, I get the car. Well, nothing like that's happening here. And I don't see how the person who's paying out, which in this case is all of us, the American taxpayer, what does the American taxpayer get in any of these deals at all. Absolutely nothing. I mean, I don't know. We could all decide what we want to get ourselves immunity from having our taxes reviewed, and that'd be a nice little sweet deal. But how does the American taxpayers get anything other than to fork out this $1 billion fund to pay Trump's cronies? And it's just a slush fund. Nobody gets anything. I think there's no consideration for the deal.
Robert, the president was not only asked about this situation when reporters met with him today in the Oval Office, he was asked about the reflecting pool and this decision by the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia to back off the charges against this Olympic canoeist, interestingly, who was charged in the middle of this and accused of vandalism. The president said that Jeanine Pirro choked and folded like an umbrella after they dropped the vandalism charges. What's this going to lead to next now? Will the D.C. government be sued for filing these wrongful charges?
You know, they very well could be. I mean, first of all, the case was an embarrassment to any prosecutor office. I mean, it seems like what this guy did is he reached in the pool and picked up a little piece of I don't know, that material that was floating around, and then they decided to charge him with a major felony. That was absurd. I would guess, by the way, that there may have been some misrepresentations in the grand jury when they got the indictment. So there might be some charges for perjury on the part of prosecutors. The case was an embarrassment. It was continuing to be an embarrassment. What the U.S. attorney did is decided to dismiss the case before it gets any more embarrassing than it already was for her in her office.
How about against the Interior Secretary, though? Doug Burgum went on national television and said that he had evidence of this vandalism. He hasn't apologized yet.
Yeah, nor has he showed any evidence. There could be a potential that this person has a lawsuit. And I will tell you, this fits into a much bigger thing. The United States taxpayers are going to be on the hook for millions and millions of dollars in settlements for ICE enforcement, for incompetency on all levels of government, including absurd charges like this. And ultimately, it's the taxpayers who are going to pay for this just simply bad government, bad use of prosecutorial resources. And that's where we're going to be for the next, I don't know, 8-10 years, paying out judgments for bad decisions like this.
Wow. Finally, Robert, before we let you go, I'd like to ask you about another lawsuit that was just filed by a group of 25 states, including New York, California, and Illinois, filing a complaint in the U.S. Court of International Trade over the latest round of global tariffs that the Trump administration put out back in July, trying to rebuild the tariff wall, if you will, after the Supreme Court's IEEPA ruling that stripped away this power. The states are arguing that the administration is using Section 301 unlawfully. The administration, of course, says they can impose Section 301 tariffs because these economies are using forced labor that undermines U.S. workers. How is this likely to shake out in court?
I think it's going to shake out the same way. This is indistinguishable from the tariff case under the Emergency Tariffs Act. Look, you know, this could be a hard question, but once again, I have the owner's manual of the country here, the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution says Congress decides when to have tariffs and when to put them in, not the president. Now, the president tries to do things under law. The specific law that he's trying to use is the Unfair Tariffs, so Unfair Trade Act of 1974. And you could make a case, for instance, China, I think for years had unfair tariffs, unfair trade practices. And you can make a case that there should be tariffs specific on China. But he's not shown the proof for these broad tariffs across the board all over the place. And he wants to stoke this idea that somehow we're getting cheated by all these third world nations who make goods and services that sometimes we buy. So I don't see how the logic of this is any way distinguishable from the case that the U.S. Supreme Court just had. It's going to lose in the courts. It's going to lose there, and he's going to whine about it on Truth Social just like he did before.
All right, Robert McWhirter and his handy-dandy pocket constitution, thank you for joining us on Balance of Power.
He's always got it with him.
Always does. Still ahead, we'll have more on Blanche's confirmation prospects and the long to-do list the Senate wants to tick off before the recess when our political panel joins us next on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
I didn't look at it. All I know is that Todd Blanche is great. He's going to do a great job. Everybody knows it. and I understand there's been a sign-off, but I don't know what they agreed. I think Todd Blanche agreed to reconfirm things that he's already said, and what he said was okay.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kayleigh Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew. President Trump there this afternoon in the Oval Office reacting to the deal we were just discussing, struck between Senators Tom Tillis and John Cornyn and Attorney General nominee, well, acting Attorney General, in fact, Todd Blanche, to advance his confirmation, get the real job after he formally rescinded the Anti-Weaponization Fund. Or did he? Joining us now for more, our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano, Democratic strategist, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, and Republican strategist Rick Davis is back with us this week, partner at Stone Court Capital. It's great to see you both. This seemed like something at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday that would do just what was needed to end this whole debate, and apparently was enough for Senators Tillis and Cornyn. But Rick, the analysis has been brutal this hour. You could apparently drive a trailer truck through this thing, at least on a legal basis. And the president indicates to reporters he still kind of likes the idea of an anti-weaponization fund. Is this dead or not?
Yeah, I'm really struck by the tone of the senators, Cornyn and Tillis, who I guess by just receiving this deal have gone like, oh, my God, this guy's great. He'll be a terrific attorney general. And,
yes,
you know, this is exactly what we asked for. Well, it's not exactly what you asked for. and it doesn't sound like the president really has given up on the idea, although he kind of put it in his rearview mirror in the comments today. But it kind of portends a bigger issue, which is you're putting a person into the job of attorney general who has not been straight with you about this project and has done a lot of other things that any other appointee at any other time would have been disqualified from serving in that job by doing.
Wow.
And so I'm struck by how the Republicans have just caved so quickly at the first instance of, okay, they've given us what we need, now we can go. I'm not exactly sure this is enough for Cassidy and others, but, you know, we'll soon find out because they're going to rush this thing to the floor as quick as they can.
Sure.
Well, to that point, both Cornyn and Tillis, Jeannie, repeatedly said that they were speaking on behalf of others who didn't want to be saying these things publicly. So if this does indeed get to the floor and you're a vulnerable Republican up for re-election like Susan Collins or Dan Sullivan, are you going to want to advance his nomination?
It creates real problems for somebody like Susan Collins. I mean, it's not just the fund. It's not just the IRS deal. It's also the Epstein files. It's also the maltreatment of the Epstein victims. It's also the weaponization of the DOJ. Is she really going to be able to look at the voters of Maine and say, once again, I essentially caved to Donald Trump? And, you know, but the thing is many of these folks in the Senate were looking to Cornyn, former Attorney General of Texas, lawyer, judge, and saying if he's satisfied, we'll be satisfied.
Right.
But to your earlier guest's point, legally, this makes no sense. You might as well have me had signed a document yesterday saying this thing was dead, because when one side signs off, that agreement still stands. So I'm not sure what moved Cornyn and Tillis, but I cannot believe it was just that document last night.
Wow, so much for the YOLO caucus. Just to be clear, though, and you can both weigh in on this if you want, what would be enough for people who are watching or listening? Is it a legislative answer? Do you need to see a bill passed?
Well, that's ultimately the fix, right?
Yeah.
Is pass a law, right? Because then it doesn't matter what anybody said at the DOJ or the White House. Well, if it was attached to something he really wanted, you know, wouldn't it be ironic that they put this on like Save America Act?
It could still happen.
Yeah, good luck, buddy. See how that works. But the reality is that's the only real fix. The administration has the ability to do this in a number of different ways, through the Treasury Department or through the Justice Department, and they may elect a different avenue. It's nothing there to stop them based on this document.
Yep.
Well, as we're having this conversation, Senator Tillis is speaking with reporters on Capitol Hill and just told them he's still going to push for legislation to kill any future anti-weaponization funds, even with this agreement in place.
In the next Congress, maybe.
Well, yeah. So we'll see when that materializes. He's outgoing. They're about to go on recess, and then we're going to be right in the midterms, maybe for the lame duck session. But on what they need to do before recess, Jeannie, they're going to vote imminently on advancing a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. This one would go through December 11th. Is this a bipartisan victory because Democrats seem to be on board, or a testament to the lack of ability to be bipartisan because this is not the regular appropriations process? They aren't really even trying. They just want to make sure they don't shut down in September.
Yeah, the real sad part, Kaylee, is when you're asking me, I'm thinking it's a victory because it has been so long since we've done anything budgetary via regular order. So when we get these continuing resolutions and you've got some agreement with Democrats and Republicans, you think, oh, it is a victory. But if you step back, it is horrendous that once again, America is running its economic house, essentially, its budgetary house via CR. And that's what we've been doing for so long. That said, of course, you do have Democrats and Republicans who are going to do this and push it through, maybe if the House will go with this, into December, which does make sense. But, when you step back, it doesn't make sense at all that we would be running our government this way.
Of course, that's a big maybe. And if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, we've got a live view flying casually in the well of the United States Senate. Rick, they're going to do what they're going to do and make changes and create a bill that does not look exactly like the one in the House. In fact, it might be very different, at which point no one gets along when they come back from August recess. And we could well have a government shutdown at that point, right?
You could, but how many times have we
around this?
How many times have we talked about this?
Well, we set a record in the last year.
And it's like, gee, the Senate just jammed the House. It happens every time. And so the Senate's going to jam the House. They got a bipartisan. We should be happy about this being a bipartisan deal. We could have been sitting here for weeks talking about like this tough negotiation. And Susan Collins, give her credit. She comes out with a deal when nobody expected this to happen on a runway, as Jeannie said, through December, which actually takes a lot of the heat off.
Right.
And something that, frankly, the president will sign. And if he'll sign it and it's okay with the Senate, then the House just got jammed. They're going to have to pass it.
So the Speaker will be on board.
Yeah, well, it's going to have to be because he doesn't really have any options at that point.
There it is.
Before we let you go, I quickly want to ask you both about this photo that was posted by Marjorie Taylor Greene, the former congresswoman, over the weekend, with Congressman Tom Massey, her husband, Brian Glenn, and Tucker Carlson. They're all at the dining table. Look it up on Twitter if you're with us on radio and can't see this. She captions it, "The movement has begun." Rick, what movement has begun?
Yeah, the only thing missing in that picture is the turkey. It looks like Thanksgiving at Tucker Carlson's house. I don't know. I mean, I think this is a dead-enders movement, right? Here are all the people that have been thrown out of the Trump world, thrown out of the Republican Party, thrown out of MAGA, and they're like, hey, all the energy's with us. All we're talking about is a picture, not what the plan is or what kind of supporters they have. So, look, they got what they wanted. We're talking about it. This is all about social media. They make their living off of that. They're going to continue to make their living off of it. We're just adding to the number of sponsors they're going to get by the end of the week.
I'm guessing they were tucking into some venison there by the looks of the knotty pine and the antlers around the chandelier. It's sort of like a bizarro Rebel Alliance from some Star Wars movie that was never made. Does this go anywhere, or are we just fooling around on Twitter?
Yeah, it's quite a way for Marjorie Taylor Greene to spend her honeymoon. And her new husband says this is, equivalent to the the first constitutional Congress in 1774. So they have big aims for this and 9 million views. So they're doing okay.
Maybe they were doing a Tucker episode or something.
9 million views and airtime on Balance of Power. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, thank you both for joining us. And of course, for more coverage, check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
See you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.